Racism, particularly the systemic kind, has often been a contentious topic in America. The United States' historical treatment of African Americans through slavery and Jim Crow has been argued to still affect the present-day black community and is responsible for significant racial disparities such as median incomes. Conservatives have responded to this by pointing out that Asian Americans on average have higher household incomes than white Americans. From this, it has been surmised that Asians, a racial group who have also faced systemic discrimination in the past, have overcome this barrier, which further indicates that the racial disparities between whites and blacks cannot be explained by racism.
Well, yeah, but when people always do that, they compare like black and white first. But if you look at like median household income and you look at it for Pakistanis, if you look at it for Indians, right, it is extraordinarily higher than it is for both white and black. Actually, both white and black are in the bottom two. And that is because, like in the bottom range there. And that's because if you look at all these other groups, these Indian groups, these Chinese groups, all these other ethnicities, their levels of, children out of wedlock are much lower than both of ours, than the white community and the black community.
Sure.
And so we keep looking at the black and the white community like that's the only problem, but it's not black and white.
Like Jews have faced systemic issues, Asians, even Indian Americans, stuff like that. But as far as I could see in the Wikipedia, I could even put this in the comments or whatever. Asian Americans make more than white people.
However, over time, a response to this argument was cultivated by those with more progressive views on this issue. They characterized the conservative argument as the so-called model minority myth.
Here we go again. TV and movies are rampant with Asian stereotypes, especially the idea that Asian people are some kind of model minority. Smart, successful, polite, obedient, and of course, inherently good at math.
Conservative groups have further elaborated that the generally higher achieving outcomes of Asian Americans are due to family values and a culture of hard work, and have controversially claimed that the culture of African Americans do not have these aspects. But in recent years, there has been an intriguing retort by progressives that the success of Asian Americans is primarily due to a large portion of them being high-skilled immigrants from more elite sections of their home countries.
It is.
And I understand that. This is a slightly different argument. So when we talk about like Pakistani communities, Indian communities, especially Chinese communities, the primary reason why these communities are going to be doing so much better than black and white communities writ large is going to be because these are immigrants largely. These are, if you have the money to immigrate from China, India, Pakistan, you're already selecting from a pretty elite class of people there in terms of who's going to come over.
Congress approved a landmark immigration law that ditched racist restrictions, but it gave preference to immigrants who had training, talent, or skill sets that would benefit the U.S. economy.
Sammy and the Rippers are changing their tune. Borders now open for smart, successful Asian immigrants.
I wouldn't say necessarily, because you also have a lot of immigration from those countries. So you're having like a lot of immigration from like Asian countries, and they're high income. They're, very educated.
While you don't hear this everywhere, it's getting popular. Even my buddy Layman agreed with Carissa in her livestream about this. So, our Destiny, Carissa Avallone, and Adam Ruins Everything correct that Asian immigration to the US is extremely qualified and educated. And how would we check this? Well, Arthur Sakamoto and Sharon Suren Wang are gifted academics who I would really recommend, as their work helped me with a previous video, though I probably butchered their names, so sorry for that. And for this video, I'm using their paper, Deconstructing Hyper-selectivity. Hyper-selectivity refers to immigrants being significantly more likely to possess university/college degrees than non-migrant inhabitants of their own countries of origin. And the current state of Asian immigration to the US has been described as hyper-selective. For example, only 5% of the Vietnamese population hold a bachelor's degree, but more than a quarter of Vietnamese immigrants have a bachelor's degree, and 51% of Chinese immigrants had graduated from college, yet only 4% of adults in China do the same. You can tell from the percentages that Chinese immigrants are extremely hyper-selective and more highly educated than the general US population. Though it isn't explicitly stated in the literature, the implication of hyper-selectivity is that Asian immigrants to the US generally possess a higher class status than the average citizen of their home country. So these hyper-selective immigrants have imported middle-class specific values rather than ethnic cultural values of hard work and striving for education. So how valid is the hyper-selectivity hypothesis? It is true that Asian immigrants are disproportionately college educated. However, most of these immigrants obtained their college or university education in the US. The 1.25 generation, as defined by Sakamoto and Swan-Ren Wang, are Asian immigrants who graduated from high school but came to the US to attend college or university. The 1.5 generation are defined as immigrants but who came to the US at a young age, so were primarily educated in America. 43% of foreign-born Asians aged 25 or older and have a college degree were part of the 1.25 generation, while 24% were a part of the 1.5 generation. Hence, only 33% of foreign-born Asians with college degrees at 25 or above didn't receive any educational degree in the US. So obviously, the college degree hyperselectivity statistics are heavily exaggerated, since most Asian immigrants weren't highly educated at the time they immigrated. 40% of the 1.25 generation didn't even have fathers with a college degree, so aren't from elite families. Another interesting test is if Asian immigrants were hyperselective, we would assume the children of these immigrants would score higher on standardized international exams than the Asian children within their home countries. Nevertheless, the average test scores for Asian Americans are usually similar to the averages of the Asian home countries, despite Asian American children scoring higher than white American children. The only disparity, if any, is that Asian Americans score lower in high school math. Great. No wonder my parents complain about my grade. The poor kids back in Sri Lanka do better than me in math.
Next up, Will Stewart says, he's coming after you, Dusty. He says, as someone who lived in Asia for 13 years, wealthy classes in Asia do not immigrate. They stay because they are wealthy. The lower middle class immigrates as they can't move classes easily in Asia.
Wow, base. Well, if he's lived there for 13 years, I mean, he must be correct.
It is peculiar to argue that elite families from Asia are more likely to come to America, since these elites put a relatively significant amount of effort to get into prestigious universities, which massively affects your future profession and even marriage when compared to America. From an early age, they attend after-school cram schools to get admitted to the top universities. These elites would hardly discard the societal benefits of their hard work after this to go to America, where the prestigiousness of their degree is not as well recognized, or not recognized at all in the US labor market. Most of these elites would rather stay back home than run a small restaurant or other low-wage businesses, typical of an American immigrant destiny. Another YouTuber who has a fixation with so-called wealthy Asian immigrants is Kyle Kulinski. If you want me to respond to him, I would be extremely grateful if you guys could get this video to 15 likes, as well as help me get to 400 subscribers. As a detour from the immigration point, there has apparently been an argument made that the children of Mexican immigrants had better educational gains than children of Vietnamese and Chinese immigrants when considering intergenerational mobility by education. But for intergenerational income mobility, 26% of Asians born in the lowest quintile end up in the highest quintile, in contrast to 3% for blacks, 7% for Hispanics, and 11% for whites. This is mainly due to the high concentration in STEM fields. With this, it seems reasonable to argue that Asian American success is partly cultural than hyperselective, since Asian American parents have higher educational expectations for their kids, spend more money for educational expectations for their kids, and save more for their children's college education, even when accounting for proportion of total family income. Moreover, Asian American children study more hours per week. Other cultural perks include lower divorce rates, two-parent homes, delaying parenthood, and help from grandparents. There is also that thing about not prioritizing self-esteem like the American culture, and in my case, focusing more on incentives. Why didn't you get 100% in your test, you dumb baby? You're getting the stick.
Wah! I hate you.
Don't you dare talk back to me.
And in 1965, Congress approved a landmark immigration law that ditched racist restrictions, but it gave preference to immigrants who had training, talent, or skill sets that would benefit the U.S. economy.
Sammy and the Rippers are changing their tune. Borders now open for smart, successful Asian immigrants. Wow, now that I've let all these educated, successful Asians into America, I've got to say, Asian Americans sure are successful and educated.
While the 1965 Immigration Act did massively contribute to several factors, such as educational attainment for Asian Americans, the educational attainment of the native-born population rivaled that of the foreign-born population long before the 1960s. In fact, the younger Chinese and Japanese generations made notable educational progress before World War II. In 1910, the educational attainment of Japanese children was low compared to white children. However, in 1920, each Japanese age group were on par or had higher enrollment rates than comparable whites. By 1930, all ages of Asian American children were more likely to go to school than white Americans, despite widespread institutional racism, such as the Chinese Exclusion Act, and resentment from low-income white workers and violent attacks. What is interesting is that, with the exception of Japanese immigrants, most early Asian immigrants arrived to the US with minimum educational qualifications. There may be the argument that these Asian immigrants were disproportionately concentrated in California and Hawaii that had better educational opportunities, but younger native-born Japanese in California still had similar or better educational attainment than whites in the same state, via either higher secondary school completion or greater college attendance. There was a smaller variation of the same trend in Hawaii. Native-born Chinese educated in 1920s California and Hawaii also had better educational attainment than white Americans. The idea that these Asian migrants had minimum qualifications hits harder when you realize the younger generation in these Asian countries are significantly more college educated than the older generation due to lack of educational institutions at the time as well as lower economic development. This trend isn't even limited to the US. Within the 20th century, second-generation Chinese, Japanese, and Vietnamese ethnic groups seem to still have higher educational attainment than the local populations in countries such as Brazil, Canada, France, Germany, Peru, and the Netherlands. Also, it is pretty weird that the highly selective immigration law didn't benefit African and Hispanic migrant groups to create their own smart and successful model minorities in America, Adam.
No. I want an answer to that. I want an answer to that question specifically. I want an answer to that question specifically.
There's been Chinese people in America for how long? Right? They're not all immigrants from China, yet they prioritize education and they prioritize the family, and they have been here for decades. And the reason is it's their priorities, not because they were already born into wealth.
Overall, even if it is more class selective after 1965, Asian immigration to the US is not very hyper-selective because the majority of foreign-born Asians with a college degree received it in the US, and the model minority isn't exactly a stereotype because native-born Asian Americans, well before 1965, had higher educational attainment than white Americans. Regardless, Asian immigrants not being hyper-selective does not necessarily mean Asians or other racial groups don't face systemic racism. That is a much deeper topic that requires much discussion. If you're interested in my other response videos, a response video playlist will appear soon, which includes the likes of Kyle Klinsky, Sam Sader, Richard Wolff, and more. I may also respond to Sean, and maybe Adam Ruins Everything's full video on the model minority. And as for Carissa Avallone, she was interested in the discussion with me, and I accepted. And then I didn't get a response cause YouTube comments aren't the best for notifications, and wasn't sure if I should have responded by Twitter at the time, since she was busy with family and work. So once again, I am fine with discussing anything if Carissa is up for it. Also, if you enjoyed the video, please feel free to give a like and comment as it really helps me in the YouTube algorithm. And consider subscribing if you like this kind of stuff. Maybe follow me on my Twitter and Rumble channel, and have a great day.